Audio is rolling. Camera is rolling. All right, Tim. Action.
Hello, my name's Tim Malone, and I'm a retired American history teacher. And I've been recording my lectures and putting them up on a YouTube channel. Tim Malone History Lectures on YouTube. Check it out. Today I'm going to talk about World War II, or as I like to call it, the big one. World War II has been described as the largest event in history, the biggest event in history, the largest scaled event in history, World War II. World War II plays a big role in American history. I've said in previous lectures that there's a big three events in American history: the Revolution, the Civil War, and World War II. The big three. World War II. Now, I'm a baby boomer. I was born in 1951, just 6 years after the end of the war. My dad served in the Army Air Force during the war. That was a ubiquitous stance for baby boomers like me. Their dads were in the war. It was a universal experience for men of my dad's age. It was a universal event, the largest event in American history. And my generation was steeped in it. I know a lot about World War II, and most baby boomers, mostly guys, of course, know a lot about World War II. A lot of the details, the chronology. What's funny is that, I'm in my 5th year of retirement, but 5 years ago when I was teaching live students in a classroom, the young kids in my class, especially the boys, knew a lot about World War II. World War II is still hot amongst history students. There's a lot of self-proclaimed World War II history buffs out there of all ages. It's a very important, popular, I guess is the word. World War II is still popular. The largest war, the largest number of people killed in a war, but it's popular. I don't know if I want to go into that right now. What it says about human beings, that a war is the most popular event. World War II, 1939, which is when the war started in Europe, to 1945. The United States got in, just like World War I, got in after the war had started. 1941, December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor Day. The Japanese, an ally of the Germans in Europe, surprise attacked the Pacific Fleet in Honolulu, Hawaii, December 7th, 1941, and the United States was in the war. We'll come back to Pearl Harbor. Well, December 7th, if you watch the network TV news, on December 7th, any December 7th in my lifetime, the newscasters are going to note this is the X anniversary of Pearl Harbor. It's still celebrated. It's still noted, along with a couple other World War II dates. Even more surprising than Pearl Harbor is D-Day, June 6th, 1944, when the United States and Britain and Canada landed troops in France. The Germans had conquered France 3-4 years earlier to open up a second front. D-Day, the invasion from England across the English Channel to invade France. June 6th, 1944. Again, if you watch the TV network news on any June 6th, they will note it till this day, to this day. It's 81 years ago. I think that's a long time. And of course, the third date is August 6th, 1945, the nuking of Hiroshima. the use of nuclear weapons. At the very end of World War II, this incredibly destructive weapon invented by the United States during the war, used at the very end against Japan. Those are the 3 dates from World War II that are still, again, if you watch the news, they'll mention that it's the anniversary of that event. I think that's kind of remarkable because there's been a lot of history since 1945. World War II is the template for war for the United States to this day. Now, we've had a lot of wars since World War II, but every one of them, Korea, Vietnam, Iran, Iraq, the Gulf War, and a multitudinous smaller wars, conflicts. The United States has been at war ever since 1945, you can say, and every war, in my opinion, is looked at through the prism of World War II. World War II is the template. We want all our wars to be like World War II. We want all our wars to be World War II to this day. Now that's proven, I think, in American history since World War II to have been a bad way to look at war. Vietnam, my generation's war. The United States, it was obvious in retrospect, the United States was trying to fight World War II in Vietnam, and it just didn't work. There are types of wars, and World War II is just one type of war. We'll talk more about that in a minute. But my point is that to this day, 2025, 80 years since the end of World War II, we're still stuck in World War II. And as a historian, that's kind of a, I'm like, wow, talk about history, talk about the relevance of history, talk about the resonance of an event years later. But see, I'm a historian. That's how history works. That's what historians are trying to tell you, right? The present is constructed like a building or a bridge. And one of the big beams in American history right now is World War II. Now, I know I said that about the Great Depression a couple of lectures ago. It's true, too. The Great Depression resonates today. World War II resonates today. I find it interesting, historically interesting. The second point I want to make about World War II is that it's come to be called the Good War. The Good War. And again, that has happened plays a part in its resonance. One of the reasons we want every war to be World War II is because World War II has come to be called a good war. The most deadly conflict in human history is good. And here, it comes from, the title comes from this book by Studs Terkel, The Good War, An Oral History of World War II. Studs Terkel, he died a few years ago. He's lived in Chicago. He's known as an oral historian. And what he did for this was he went around and tape recorded. And this is from the 80s. This book's got some age on it now. There were still plenty of World War II veterans and people who lived through it. Now they're rare, 2025. There's still some World War II veterans left, but not many, less every day. The Good War. Why? Why was it called the Good War? Well, it's come to be perceived that it was against evil. And of course, who are we talking about when we talk about evil in history? Adolf Hitler and his Nazis in Germany. The Holocaust. We fought to bring down an evil regime by anyone's reckoning, well, almost anyone's reckoning. The Nazis were evil. They introduced the concept of genocide. Now, there'd been genocides before, but the word was invented after World War II, genocide. The Holocaust, the death factories, naked aggression against your neighbors, aggressive war. We fought against that and we conquered that in World War II. Evil was destroyed by good. Now, we'll talk about how good the United States was in World War II. The Good War. We were attacked. I talked about Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941. We were attacked. That's how we got into the war. Thus, the country came into the war united. The country rallied. Before Pearl Harbor, the war had been going on in Europe against evil since 1939, a couple of years, England. And then in June of 1941, the Nazis attacked the Soviet Union. So it was the Soviet Union and England against Hitler's Germany. And the United States in revulsion against Wilson's World War I was not going to get involved. Hitler's Germany was obviously evil, and yet the American people were so repulsed by World War I that 20 years later, they didn't want to get into the war against evil. It took the Japanese, Germany's ally, attacking us, surprise attack, Pearl Harbor, to get us into the war. But it united us. The country became united. We were attacked. A lot like 9/11. The Good War. The war was well led. It was a New Deal war. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the New Deal, was in charge of Washington and had been for 9 years. The New Dealers ran the war, and they ran it, relatively speaking, well. Unlike World War I, which was not well led. The war was well led. It was a New Deal war. It was, in my opinion, it's perfectly right to call it a liberal war. Franklin Roosevelt's the quintessential liberal. The New Deal was quintessential liberal program. World War II was a liberal war. It was against evil. It was well led. The New Dealers were used to running nationwide programs as a result, as a response to the Great Depression. They were used to thinking nationwide. And so when the war came, the United States had a leg up in the sense that it was led by people who'd been perceiving the nation as a whole. One of the things about the World War II was it was the fairest draft. We instituted a draft, drafting young men into the service. There'd been one during the Civil War, there'd been one during World War I, and then now one was instituted for World War II. And it was the fairest draft in American history. The rich kids went. The rich kids went, World War II. In fact, not far into the war, the government put an end to enlistments. You couldn't enlist in the Army. Everyone had to be drafted. You could volunteer to be drafted, but you had to be drafted. Everyone was drafted. Because during Vietnam, and again, you know, this is stuff I kind of know from talking to Vietnam veterans, that if you enlisted during the Vietnam War, you got treated better than the boys who were drafted. If you were drafted, you were going to end up with a rifle and a rice paddy. If you enlisted, probably not. Not during World War II, not with the New Dealers. Everybody was drafted and everybody was treated the same. The final reason it's called the Good War is because we won big. We won big. The policy of unconditional surrender, which was announced not long after we got into the war with England and the Soviet Union. We won big. It was a conclusive, decisive victory. Not like World War I, not like World War I, which was an armistice, a ceasefire, armies still in place facing each other, and then a peace conference that failed miserably. World War II. there was no doubt as to who won World War II. The regimes in Japan and Italy and Germany were annihilated, were put out of business, were extinguished. We won big. The good war. The third point I want to make about World War II is the war was fought by men who self-consciously wanted to avoid the errors made in World War I. The bad war. I think you can think of the good war as opposed to what? World War I, the bad war. And the men who led England, Soviet Union, United States, the big three, the Allies, had all participated in the government, well, not the Soviet Union, but still England and the United States. World War I, they had been young men in World War I, and now they were older leaders, and they understood that mistakes had been made in World War I. Not just the peace treaty, but the way the war was fought, the trench warfare. World War II was fought by generals who wanted to avoid the trenches. Thus you got mechanized war, panzer divisions, armored divisions, paratroopers. The men who led the armies in World War II had fought in World War I, and they wanted no part of the trenches. World War II is a reaction in many ways to World War I. And of course, Winston Churchill, the leader of England during World War II and a historian after the war, said that he thought they would become considered one war. The second 30 Years' War, he called it, 1914 to 1945. 30-year conflict with a truce in the middle. Another point about World War II. American entry into World War II and then American victory in World War II put an end to American isolationism. American isolationism, which had been the original foreign policy of the United States, at least as regards Europe. The United States, for the first 100 years of its existence, the first 120 years of its existence, had pursued a foreign policy. We're not getting involved in European power politics. We're not getting involved in those incessant European wars. Isolationism, capital I, isolationism. Now, Wilson in World War I chinked that, but then the United States, after World War I, in their disgust at Wilson and his war, went back into an even more hyper isolationism between World War I and World War II. Again, American isolationism was so powerful that Hitler's Germany, on the march in Europe, conquering France and Norway, dominating Europe, attacking the Soviet Union and pushing it back to Moscow. Even that Germany, genocidal Germany, the American people wanted no part of that struggle until the Japanese surprise attacked us and Hitler declared war on us. Hitler declared war on us. After World War II, the United States arrives as a self-conscious, globe-straddling superpower. Number one. Now, we were number one by anybody who took note of these things. After World War I, we were number one, but we declined. We went home. Isolationism. There's no doing that after World War II. It's obvious who number one is. And the United States shoulders into that burden, perhaps too much. The American Empire, it's called. To this day, we're globe-straddling superpower. Although the Trump movement here in 2025 is way more isolationist, harkens back to American isolationism. Because I always said during my teaching career, I always tell my students, scratch an American and find an isolationist. Even to this day. Isolationism has an appeal to me. Isolationism. Close the bases down and bring the troops home. To hell with this America number one. To hell with this, we're the indispensable nation. If it wasn't for us, there'd be chaos and war everywhere. But that's the result of World War II. We won big. It was obvious who the globe-straddling superpower was. It was obvious who the stabilizer. Somebody has to stabilize the world. World policeman, you've heard that one. Now that rubs a lot of Americans the wrong way. You know, what the hell? Why do we have troops everywhere? Why are we the ones? Because what, somebody has to do it? And it was obvious? It was so plainly obvious after World War II who number one was. Despite the Cold War and the Soviet Union, and we'll get into that. 5 points about World War II. And this is something Americans are not really taught. The important role that communists played in the Allied victory in World War II. World War II was a great victory for communism. Hitler's Germany, the Nazis, the fascists, hated communists. Well, they thought communists and Jews were the same thing. That's just part of it. And the Soviet Union had gone commie after World War I. Lenin and then Stalin, and obnoxious police state regimes. The Soviet Union, communism, as it turned out. You can still see it in North Korea today. Obnoxious, bloody, cold-hearted regimes. Terrible places. Communism, but Hitler, when he started World War II, his goal was to destroy the Soviet Union, Russia, because they were communists. France and England and North Africa and all that was kind of secondary. And on June 22nd, 1941, Hitler's Germany attacked Stalin's Soviet Union. Well, the Eastern Front, bloody, no prisoners taken. The Eastern Front, the Russians versus the Germans, the Nazis versus the commies, and the commies won. The communists won. And in places like Yugoslavia and in France, the underground, the resistance to the German conquerors, after the Germans conquered these countries, were led by communists. In the hills, the partisans were communist-led. The communists were in the forests. The communists were blowing up German transportation routes during the war. The communists. And so when the war is over, not surprisingly, who has the laurels of victory on their head in a place like France? The communists. In a place like Greece, the communists. They'd paid their dues. Now, post-World War II, the United States, the Cold War between capitalism and communism, the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union, was mostly about the United States trying to rob the communists of the laurels of victory that they'd earned during World War II. Now see, we don't get this story in American history because right after World War II came the Cold War, freedom versus communism. For what, 50 years? 40 years or 50 years of Cold War? Not so cold in Korea. Not so cold in Vietnam. Communism. So we didn't give our history books, our history courses, our culture didn't give the communists the credit they deserved for defeating Hitler and fascism. The Soviet Union inflicted 3/4 of the casualties on the German army. The Soviet Union, that war on the Eastern Front, which was just terrible. Brutal. Communists. 6th point about World War II, the way it ended. Now, we already talked about the fact that it was fought by men who didn't want it to end like World War I. World War I, it ended in an armistice, a ceasefire. No. Early on, right after the United States got in the war, the big three, promulgated the unconditional surrender. That's all the Germans and the Japanese could do. No armistice, no ceasefires, no negotiations. Unconditional surrender, that's it. That's the only option. They're going to pursue these regimes to their extinction. We're going to occupy their countries. We're going to invade and occupy their countries. We're going to occupy their capitals. We're going to extinguish the governments. Unconditional surrender. The way it ended, the way World War II ended, of course, nuclear weapons, the use of nuclear weapons against Japan. Now, Germany surrendered on May 8th, 1945, when the Soviet armies and the American armies met in Germany. Germany was overrun. May 8th. Japan still fought on the other side of the world, in the Pacific. And the United States, during the war, Albert Einstein, the famous nuclear physicist, wrote a letter to Franklin Roosevelt saying, hey, here's something you should know about physics and weapons. So the United States decided, the Manhattan Project, to pursue this idea of a nuclear bomb, and succeeded. And then we were bombing Japan anyway. We're going to talk more about that in the next lecture, about the bombing campaigns in World War II. Because, boy, the United States are still we're bombers, man. We love the bombing. And we'll talk about the history of bombing. Very interesting. We dropped a nuclear weapon on Hiroshima, Japan, and 3 days later, a nuclear weapon on Nagasaki, Japan, and the Japanese surrendered. But thus started the nuclear age, and we're still in it. Russia, the United States primarily, have thousands of nuclear weapons at this day. Enough to destroy civilization. The nuclear balance of terror began at the end of World War II. Nuclear weapons. The way World War, with the first and only use of nuclear weapons, it put an end to total war. You can't just, no one wins a nuclear war. At least leaders have believed that for the last 80 years. The way it ended, the second thing is nuclear weapons, and then the discovery of the Holocaust, the systematic industrial elimination of the European Jews by the Nazi regime in Germany, the Holocaust, still haunts us to this day. Genocide. World War II brings the world genocide. Now, there had been genocides before, all the way back into ancient history. There had been genocides, but World War II highlighted the German Nazi genocide against European Jews. And it stuck. It hit a chord in humanity. Never again, not again. Now, there's been attempted genocides. There's been genocides light and attempted genocide since. But the world was awakened to this idea, this crime, and it changed things. The idea of crimes against humanity. The Nuremberg trials after World War II, where the surviving Nazi leaders were put on trial and executed for crimes against humanity. The idea of crimes against humanity is a result of World War II. And we're still grappling with that to this day. But at least it's out there. The United Nations. Now, there had been the League of Nations after World War I, failed. Well, the United States didn't join. Most powerful country in the world didn't join. After World War II, the United Nations, the self-conscious successor to the League of Nations, inherited all its files and everything, the United Nations. And not only did the United States join, we put it in New York City, in the United States, the United Nations. The idea of world government, the idea of a league, a confederation of nations to arbitrate disputes, to intervene in famines and natural disasters. The United Nations. Now, the United Nations has not lived up to its potential, in my opinion. It has not lived up to its charter, but it exists. It's more important to a lot of countries than it is the United States, but you'd expect the United States, number one, the paramount nation, would always have trouble with an organization of a bunch of little countries. I wish the United States would be more supportive of the United Nations. But the one world concept, internationalism, a result of World War II. And then, of course, the way the victors treated the losers. After World War I, the victors, mainly England and France, sent Germany a bill. After World War II, the Allies, mostly the United States, sent Germany a check. The exact opposite. Now, a lot of that had to do with the Cold War. We wanted our half of Germany to be on our side in the Cold War against communism. So we wanted a prosperous Germany, but the Marshall Plan, we rebuilt Japan. Rather than kicking them when they're down, we said, here, let me give you a hand back up. Now again, there were ulterior motives. It wasn't done for altruistic purposes. But still, keep that in mind in your own life, right? About defeated enemies. Let's talk about total war now. World War II was the total war. Now, we talked about total war when World War I came around. Total war. Total war is a situation where the combatants are totally mobilized. Total war is short for total mobilization. A society, a country, is totally mobilized for war. Now, the idea is that only industrialized modern nations can wage total war. Now, I don't know about that. I think back in the Peloponnesian War, Sparta versus Athens, I think Sparta and Athens were pretty much totally mobilized for war. But this is the way it's thought of today. World War I is the first total war. And you're talking about England, France, and Germany. The United States comes in World War I late and never gets to total mobilization. The United States gets to total mobilization during World War II. Total mobilization. The entire country, the entire economy, the entire populace is mobilized for war. Total mobilization, total war. And once you get total war, that goes to the top when you're typing out wars, when you're talking about what kind of war is this. The top of the list is total war. You start there. And then there's lesser wars, where the country's not totally mobilized for war. Well, if it's not total war, what is it? Well, limited war. So there's only two kinds of war. There's total war, which World War I and World War II were the only ones, the only total wars. And every war since then, and most of the wars before then, were limited wars. Limited. World War II, I mean, literally every man between 18 and originally 45, when we first declared war in World War II, the draft was 18 to 45. Only a year later or so, they cut that back to 35. But everybody's in. That's total war. Every shop, every factory, war production. The economy is regulated. You have coupon books and ration cards to buy meat. You couldn't buy a tire for your private car. total mobilization. Now, of course, not, never total, but close enough to be called total war. World War II is the total war. One of the aspects of total war is that your opponent has the right to bomb your civilian infrastructure. Since everybody's involved, since industrial production and transport are of the utmost importance in an industrial, modern, total war, they are targets. Thus, in total war, the distinction between civilian and soldier collapses. Thus, you can drop an atomic bomb in downtown Hiroshima. Right downtown, First and Main. That's total war. That's the logic of total war. Civilians are combatants. Factory workers are combatants. Farmers are combatants. And thus, proper targets. Thus, you get the idea of strategic bombing. Bombing. I told you we're going to talk about bombing because it plays such a central role in American history since World War II. Bombing. Hell, we're bombing today. We're bombing right now. We're bombing the Houthis, right? Every day. Doesn't even make the news. It's not even commented on. And then this brings up the idea of the morality of total war, the morality of strategic bombing. Just fly over the cities and drop bombs and kill everybody, anybody that's underneath, babies. How many babies do you have to kill for it to be morally repugnant? How many children? But according to the logic of total war, according to the logic of modern industrial war, babies are legitimate targets. That's World War II. World War II starts that. The total war. The aerial campaign, the bombing of Germany and Japan. Now, of course, Germany bombed England, too. Both sides. But that was a pygmy effort in comparison to what we would later do to Germany, and then, of course, Japan. We'd firebombed and burned 60 Japanese cities before we nuked Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I'll do a lecture on that, I think. I've lectured on America and bombing. World War II. Another point about World War II. World War II affords a great opportunity to examine the idea of turning points in history. And again, every World War II enthusiast, hobbyist, and there's thousands of them out there, mostly men. I ran into them in my classes. Decisions, turning points. World War II is littered with them. Number one, Hitler's decision to invade the Soviet Union on June 22nd, 1941. Now again, earlier in this lecture I said that was his plan all along, to get rid of the commies in the Soviet Union. They were this is complicated. In 1939, the Soviet Union, the commies, and the fascists in Germany, mortal enemies, made a non-aggression pact and invaded Poland and divided it between them. They were quasi-allies, these ideological enemies, until Germany, Hitler, surprise attacked Soviet Union, June 22nd, 1941. And that was the ultimate decision that ended up in Hitler's defeat, because it was the Soviet Union that tore the guts out of the German army in a brutal 4-year war on the Eastern Front. Hitler's decision. What if he hadn't done that? Another turning point, World War II, the Japanese decision to bomb Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941. Why? There's been entire books written about this, and to this day, it just doesn't make any sense. Japan had 1/10 of the industrial capacity of the United States, 1/10. During World War II, the Japanese built 18 aircraft carriers, naval construction, 18. The United States, during the same period, built 105. And yet they attacked us. They wanted a war with us. What, were they nuts? There were Japanese admirals and generals at the time when the decision was made to attack the United States who said, we can't win a war with the United States. They said that in committee meetings, in war planning sessions. They said, we can't defeat the United States in a war, and yet they attacked us. A lot of the, how do you explain it? Because the Japanese have this thing with fate, have this thing with Bushido. I will fight to the death even though I know I'm going to die. It was cultural factors that led them into this stupid decision to attack the world superpower. Now, as it was, the United States will end up, well, I'll get to that in a minute. And then, of course, the final turning point, decisive decision, was Truman's decision to nuke Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Was that necessary? Why did he do that? Japan was on the verge of surrender anyway. Japan was defeated. We'd already firebombed 60 of their cities, and their cities were made out of wood and paper. We burned the hell out of Japan before we nuked Hiroshima. We nuked Hiroshima and Nagasaki because they were a couple only cities left. Japan was on the verge of defeat. Well, we'll talk about that. We'll talk about Truman's decision and what probably motivated it. And finally, I want to talk about military feats of World War II. The United States, of course, we're isolated, North America, two big oceans. The United States sent 5 million men to Europe to help defeat the Germans. At the same time, the United States sent 3 million men even further across the Pacific to defeat Japan. Unbelievable. To this day, and that's 80 years ago, awe-inspiring. Projection of power. No nation has ever done anything like that over those distances and those numbers. Unbelievable projection of power. And the United States still projects power worldwide. We're the only worldwide power to this day. We project power everywhere. That started in World War II. What a feat. What an unbelievable feat. Projection of power. However, as unbelievable as it may sound, that was not the premier military feat of World War II. That was not the most amazing feat of World War II. The Soviet Union, the commies, survived one of the most devastating defeats in the history of warfare. The first 6 months after the Germans attacked the Soviet Union in the summer and fall of 1941, the Soviet Union lost 5 million men, and yet rallied and pushed the Germans back, tore the guts out of the German army, tore the guts out of the German army, and captured Berlin. After one of the most incredible military defeats in history, they rallied and defeated the Germans. Amazing. I like to say, thank God for the godless Red Army, right? The Soviet Union defeated Germany. Now, we helped. D-Day, 3 million American troops. But it was the Soviet Union. That's an incredible military feat.